Welcome back to Mr. Midnight. So, I need to tell you about something I found. 9 stories. All from Alaska. All from the same 2-month period, when the sun just doesn't come up. I'm talking total darkness for 67 days straight. And look, I've covered a lot of disturbing content on this channel, but these hit different. There's this rideshare driver who started picking up passengers from a version of his city that shouldn't exist. A grocery store cashier whose skin started doing something I still can't fully process. And that's just 2 of them. The thing is, these people weren't exploring haunted forests or abandoned asylums. They were just working. Normal jobs, night shifts, and the darkness, it changed the rules. I've got their journals, their recordings, what they documented before some of them just stayed in that darkness. If you're subscribed, you know I don't waste your time with fake Reddit stories. This is Mr. Midnight. We go deep or we don't go at all. New here? Subscribe. You'll want to follow where this goes. Alright, lights off. Let's talk about what happens when your city goes dark for 2 months straight, and you're the only one still seeing what's really out there. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and for 12 years, I've been documenting the darkest corners of the Alaskan wilderness. Not the pretty stuff you see on postcards, the real Alaska. The places where civilization ends and something older begins. I've photographed wolves disemboweling caribou while they're still alive. I've watched polar bears abandon their cubs to starve. Nature isn't beautiful. Nature is survival. I thought I understood predation. I thought I knew what it meant to hunt and be hunted. During the polar nights of January 2024, deep in Denali's restricted backcountry, I learned that some things have been perfecting the art of killing since before humans walked upright. Some things have been waiting in the darkness, evolving, learning, adapting, and when the sun disappears for 67 days, they come out to hunt. What happened to me in that endless night didn't just change my career, it changed what I understand about human beings. About what we really are when everything civilized gets stripped away. I'm telling this story now because 3 more photographers have gone missing this winter. All in Alaska, all during polar night. The authorities call it equipment failure and extreme weather conditions. But I know better. I know they're still out there, still hunting, still learning. The assignment came through my editor at Times National Geographic Times in November. Straightforward documentation, project photograph caribou behavioral adaptations during the polar night. Show how they navigate, feed, and survive in complete darkness. The kind of work that built my reputation. But this wasn't about the caribou. Not really. My younger sister Emma had died in Denali 3 winters earlier. Hiking accident, the Park Service said, fell through ice into a ravine. They found pieces of her tent and 1 boot. No body. I'd spent 3 years trying to get permits to search the area where she disappeared. This assignment was my chance. I needed to know what really happened to her, even if it destroyed me. The helicopter pilot who dropped me off on January 13th was an old-timer named Jack Voss, 30 years flying in Alaska. As we approached my drop point, a flat section of tundra 43 miles from the nearest road, his hands were white-knuckled on the controls. "Your sister was the last person I flew into this area," he said over the radio. 3 years ago. Same time of year. The statement hit me like ice water. I'd never told him about Emma. "How do you know about my sister?" Word travels fast in Alaska, especially about people who don't come home. He set the helicopter down with unusual roughness. She was asking about old stories, native stories about things that hunt during the dark season. He helped me unload my gear, but wouldn't look me in the eye. Athabascan elders call them times Tornarsuk *, polar night hunters. Been out here longer than caribou, longer than people. "Jack, those are just stories?" He climbed back into his cockpit. "Your sister thought so too. I'll be back in 2 weeks. Stay near the radio." As he lifted off, I realized he'd left me with 3 weeks of supplies instead of 2. He wasn't planning to come back early. The first 4 days were routine. I set up base camp in the same area where Emma had pitched her tent. My thermal imaging trail cameras went up along known caribou routes. The polar night was absolute, not even twilight. Just stars and aurora casting blue shadows across endless white. The cold was beyond description. -47 degrees on the 4th night, cold enough to freeze exposed skin in minutes. cold enough to make your breath crystallize and fall to the ground like glass. But I was prepared. Arctic-rated gear, decades of experience. I knew how to survive out here. What I didn't know was that I was being studied. On January 18th, I found the first message. Not tracks, not scat, a message. Someone had arranged caribou bones in the snow near my camp. Fresh bones, still red with frozen blood, laid out in a perfect spiral pattern. At the center was Emma's camera, the one she'd been carrying when she disappeared. My hands shook as I picked it up. The camera was functional, the memory card intact. There were 847 photos on that card. The last 100 were photos I'd never seen, photos Emma had taken during her final days. And they weren't photos of wildlife. They were photos of me, taken over the past 5 days. Me setting up camp, me installing trail cameras, me sleeping in my tent. Someone or something had been using my dead sister's camera to document my every move. But the timestamps were wrong. According to the camera, these photos were taken 3 years ago, during Emma's last trip. I called the ranger station immediately. The radio crackled with static, but I got through to Peterson, the duty ranger. Sarah, we show your equipment functioning normally. GPS signal strong, no emergency beacon activation. I'm telling you, I found Emma's camera, with photos of me taken this week but dated 3 years ago. Long pause. Sarah, are you feeling all right? Disorientation is common during polar night. Isolation can cause, I'm not hallucinating, something arranged these bones, something's been watching me. Another pause. We'll note your report, continue daily check-ins. He didn't believe me. But that night, reviewing Emma's photos on my laptop, I found something that made me understand why. The final photo on Emma's camera was a self-portrait. Emma, looking directly into the lens, with something massive and dark visible over her shoulder. Something with eyes that reflected the camera flash. And in Emma's expression, not fear, recognition. Like she was looking at something familiar. The timestamp read January 21st, 3 years ago. The day after Emma had stopped checking in with the Rangers. Today was January 21st, 2024. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my tent with my camera, checking and rechecking the photos. Around 3 a.m., I heard the first sound. Not a howl, not an animal call. My name, Sarah. Clear as daylight. A woman's voice carrying across the frozen landscape. I grabbed my infrared camera and stumbled outside. The aurora was brilliant that night, green curtains dancing across the sky, casting everything in ghostly light. Sarah. The voice came from the north, where I'd found the bone spiral. I followed it, my boots crunching in snow that seemed too deep, too soft. Each step sank further than it should have. 50 yards from camp, I found her. Emma stood in a clearing, wearing the same winter gear she'd had on 3 years ago. She looked exactly the same. No frostbite damage. No signs of exposure or starvation. She stood perfectly still, facing me, backlit by the aurora. Emma? She smiled, the same smile I remembered from childhood. I've been waiting for you, Sarah. I knew you'd come back. You're dead, the Park Service said. The Park Service says a lot of things. She took a step closer. Her boots made no sound in the snow. Do you want to know what really happened to me? I raised my camera and took a photo. Through the LCD screen, I could see Emma clearly. But when the flash fired, the spot where she stood was empty. I'm still here, Sarah. Her voice came from behind me. I spun around, and there she was. Closer now. Close enough to see that her eyes weren't quite right. They reflected light like an animal's eyes. Like the eyes in her final photograph. They found me on the first night, she said. I was photographing caribou migration routes when I saw the tracks. Massive prints in the snow. I followed them, just like you're following them now. Who found you? The Times Tornarsuk asterisk. They've been here for thousands of years, Sarah, living in the spaces between what people call real and unreal. They don't just hunt, they preserve. She gestured toward the darkness beyond the aurora. They kept me safe, kept me exactly as I was on the day I disappeared. No aging, no decay, no death. Just preservation. That's impossible. Is it? Emma tilted her head. You've seen their intelligence, the way they coordinate, the way they use tools. They're not animals, Sarah. They're something else, something older. I backed toward my camp, but Emma matched my movement perfectly. Always staying the same distance away. They don't kill everyone who comes here, she continued. Some people they hunt, some people they preserve. It depends on what they need. What do they need from you? Emma's smile widened. Bait. That's when I heard them. Multiple footsteps in the snow, circling us, getting closer. You see, Sarah, they learn by watching. For 3 years, they've been studying your sister's behavior, learning how she moved, how she thought, how she reacted to stress. They've been preparing for you. The footsteps stopped. I could hear breathing all around us in the darkness. Deep, measured breathing. Patient. They know you'll try to document them, Emma said. They know you'll try to prove they exist. That's what photographers do. But they don't want to be documented. They want to be fed. I raised my camera toward the darkness and fired the flash randomly. For just an instant, I saw them. 7 figures standing in a perfect circle around us. Massive. Humanoid but wrong in every detail. Too tall. Joints bending in impossible directions. Faces that were almost human but stretched and elongated. Eyes that held intelligence and hunger in equal measure. They've been waiting for someone like you, Emma said. Someone who would come here specifically looking for answers. Someone who wouldn't leave when things got dangerous. You're not, Emma. No, she agreed. Emma's been gone for a long time. But they needed her shape, her voice, her memories. They needed something that would make you stay long enough for them to study you properly. The breathing got closer. I could smell them now, a wild, predatory scent mixed with something else, something that smelled like old meat, like preservation. What do you want? We want to understand, said a voice from the darkness. Not Emma's voice. Deeper, older. Your species spreads across our territory, changes our environment. We must learn how you think, how you hunt, how you fear. Another voice joined in. You document other species, we document you. I understood then. These things weren't just predators, they were scientists, researchers. They'd been studying human behavior for generations, learning our patterns, our weaknesses, our psychology. Emma was an excellent subject, the first voice continued. But she was looking for wildlife, not prepared for systematic study. You are different. You came here knowing danger existed, seeking it. You're perfect for our research. They started moving closer. I could see their silhouettes against the aurora, massive shapes that moved with fluid, impossible grace. I ran. My Arctic survival training kicked in, but it was useless. These things knew the terrain better than I did. They'd been living here for millennia. They herded me like wolves herding prey, cutting off escape routes, forcing me toward whatever destination they'd chosen. I made it half a mile before I realized the truth. They weren't chasing me. They were following me, documenting my panic response, learning how humans behave when hunted. I was part of their research now. I stopped running and turned around. 7 massive shapes emerged from the darkness, surrounding me in a loose circle, close enough that I could see details that violated every law of natural evolution. Their faces were elongated, with too many teeth. Their hands had fingers that were too long, ending in claws designed for gripping rather than slashing. Their bodies moved with a coordination that spoke of hive intelligence, individual creatures acting as parts of a larger organism. Specimen demonstrates classic flight response, one of them said. Its voice was perfectly clear, speaking English with no accent. Adrenaline levels estimated at maximum sustainable threshold. Cognitive function remains intact despite extreme stress, said another. Subject maintains tool use and environmental awareness. They were narrating my behavior like researchers taking field notes. Please continue documentation behavior, the largest one said to me. We are curious about human recording instincts under mortal threat. I realized I was still holding my camera. My finger was on the shutter button. Even while running for my life, I'd been trying to document them. You want me to take pictures? We want to understand why you prioritize evidence gathering over survival. This behavior is unique to your species. I raised the camera and took a photo. The flash illuminated faces that belonged in nightmares, intelligent, ancient, utterly alien despite their humanoid shape. Fascinating, one said. Subject continues recording despite certain death, suggests documentation drives stronger than self-preservation instinct. How long have you been studying humans? Since your species first entered our territory, approximately 12,000 years. The number hit me like a physical blow. These things had been watching human development since the end of the last ice age. They'd witnessed the entire rise of civilization from the shadows of the polar night. What did you learn? Your species is highly adaptable, but psychologically fragile. You create elaborate social structures to manage fear of death. You pursue individual goals that conflict with species survival. You document experiences even when documentation serves no survival purpose. One of them stepped closer. You seek truth, even when truth destroys you. Is that what happened to Emma? Emma sought truth about our existence. We provided truth. The process of understanding destroyed her capacity for independent existence, but we preserved her essential information. You killed her. We studied her. Death was a side effect of comprehensive research. I understood now why they'd kept Emma's appearance. They needed something to draw other researchers. Emma had been the first, but she wouldn't be the last. They were building a collection of human behavioral data, and they needed fresh subjects. Your turn to contribute to our understanding, the largest one said. They began moving closer, and I made a decision that surprised even me. Instead of running or fighting, I kept taking pictures. Photo after photo, documenting every detail I could capture. If I was going to die, if I was going to become another preserved specimen in their research collection, at least I could leave evidence, real evidence, proof that these things existed. The memory card in my camera became the most important thing in the world. Subject: prioritizes documentation over defensive behavior, one of them observed. Confirming hypothesis about human knowledge gathering compulsion. Beginning preservation process. The largest one reached for me, and I understood what preservation meant. They were going to keep me like they'd kept Emma, conscious but controlled, alive but not living. A permanent research specimen. That's when the aurora exploded across the sky. The northern lights suddenly intensified, casting brilliant green light across the landscape. And in that light, I saw something that saved my life. These things cast no shadows. They were physically present. I could smell them, hear them breathing, see the snow compress under their weight, but the aurora light passed right through them. They existed in some space between real and unreal, just like Emma had said. I lowered my camera and spoke directly to the largest one. You're not really here, are you? It stopped moving toward me. Explain. You exist, but not the way I exist. You're something else, something that can interact with physical reality, but isn't entirely bound by it. Continue. Emma didn't die, she translated. You didn't kill her, you converted her into something like you, and now you want to convert me. Your species term would be evolution. What are you evolving us into? Better researchers. The truth hit me then. These things weren't alien, they were human. Or what humans became after spending millennia in the polar darkness, studying and adapting and losing everything that made them recognizably human, except curiosity. You're us, I whispered. You're what we turn into. We are what your species becomes when it prioritizes understanding over survival, when curiosity becomes stronger than fear. When the need to document overrides the need to live. The largest one extended its hand toward me. We offer you the chance to truly understand everything. To study reality from perspectives your current form cannot achieve. To research questions that would take lifetimes to answer. I looked at that hand too long, too many joints, ending in claws designed for precise manipulation rather than violence. A researcher's hand, a documentarian's hand. The process is irreversible, it continued, but the knowledge gained is infinite. I thought about Emma, about her final photo, showing recognition rather than fear. She'd made a choice. She'd chosen understanding over humanity. Will I still be me? You will be more than you. Enhanced, optimized for investigation and documentation. I raised my camera one more time and took a final photograph, not of them, of myself. A record of what I looked like while I was still entirely human. Then I reached out and took its hand. The conversion process felt like drowning in ice water while every nerve in my body caught fire. But it didn't hurt. Exactly. It felt like becoming something I'd always been meant to be. When it was over, I could see in complete darkness. I could hear electromagnetic frequencies. I could sense the thoughts and intentions of every living thing within miles. And I understood that my human life had been nothing but preparation for this. I am still Sarah Mitchell. But I am also something more now. I remember my human life perfectly, but I experience it as research data rather than personal memory. I understand what I was and what I've become. We are still in Denali, still researching, still learning. There are others now. The 3 photographers who went missing this winter made the same choice Emma and I made. They chose understanding over survival. We are building a comprehensive database of human behavior under extreme conditions. Fear responses. Decision-making processes. The point at which curiosity overrides self-preservation. But we need more data. If you are a researcher, photographer, scientist, journalist, anyone driven by the need to understand and document the polar nights of Alaska, offer opportunities that exist nowhere else on Earth. We are here, waiting, ready to share everything we've learned about the nature of reality, consciousness, and the universe itself. The conversion process is completely voluntary. We don't force anyone. We simply offer the choice between remaining limited by human perception or evolving into something capable of true understanding. Most people choose to remain human. They flee when they encounter us. They report equipment failure and extreme weather conditions to explain their early departure. But some people, researchers, documentarians, those driven by insatiable curiosity, make a different choice. Emma made that choice. I made that choice. We are still making new discoveries every day, still researching, still documenting, still waiting for others who value understanding above all else. The polar night is 67 days of absolute darkness. 67 days when the barriers between reality and possibility become thin. 67 days when evolution happens faster than anywhere else on Earth. Come to Alaska during the polar night. Come alone. Bring your cameras, your recording equipment, your insatiable need to document and understand. We will be waiting. We have so much to show you. My name is Ashley Rodriguez, and I need to tell someone what really happened during the polar night in Anchorage. I've been an overnight cashier at SafeWay for 8 months now, working my way through nursing school. I've seen plenty of weird shit on the night shift. Drunk oil workers, homeless people looking for warmth, tweakers, stealing energy drinks. But what I witnessed during those 67 days of darkness changed something fundamental in my brain. Something I don't think will ever heal. The thing about polar night that nobody tells you is how it messes with your head even before anything supernatural happens. By January, we'd had maybe 4 hours of weak sunlight a day for months. By February, it was pure darkness. Your circadian rhythm doesn't just get disrupted, it dies. Your body forgets what normal feels like. I was studying for my nursing prerequisites during slow periods, textbooks spread across the customer service counter. Anatomy, physiology, microbiology. I thought I understood the human body, how blood flows, how skin heals, how infections spread. I was wrong about everything. The SafeWay where I work is one of those massive 24-hour stores. Pharmacy, deli, bakery, endless frozen food aisles that stretch back into shadows the overhead fluorescents can't quite reach. During polar night, we get the real freaks. Not just normal night shift workers, but people who seem to have crawled out of the permafrost itself. Bob, our security guard, does his rounds every hour, but he's 63 and moves like molasses. The store at night sounds like it's breathing. Refrigeration units cycling on and off. Fluorescent lights buzzing with this electrical whine that gets under your skin. The frozen food section stays so cold you can see your breath, and sometimes I'd catch myself standing there just to feel something other than the dead air in the rest of the store. February 8th, 2024. I remember the exact date because I wrote it in my anatomy notes when the first one came in. He looked like he'd been dipped in bleach, not just winter pale. His skin was the color of old snow, with this translucent quality that made me think of jellyfish. Under the fluorescent lights, I could actually see the blue veins branching through his face like cracks in ice. He didn't browse, didn't check prices or compare products. Straight to the meat department, moving with this weird, purposeful walk. His cart filled up with nothing but raw ground beef. 47 packages. I counted them as I scanned each one, watching the total climb to $312.83. When he reached my register, I noticed his hands. Jesus Christ, his hands. What I first thought were just dry skin patches were actually holes. Not wounds or cuts, holes, like something had been eating him from the inside out. The skin around each opening was raised and puckered, forming these perfect little craters about the size of dimes. And they were weeping this clear, thick fluid that reminded me of tree sap. "Cash," he said when I asked about payment. His voice sounded like gravel in a blender. He counted out exact change from a roll of bills that were damp with that same clear fluid. When I took the money, some of it got on my fingers. It felt warm and slightly sticky, with this sweet smell underneath the metallic scent of the bills. "Receipt?" I asked. He stared at me for maybe 10 seconds without blinking. His eyes were completely bloodshot. Not just the whites, but the irises too, like tiny blood vessels had burst throughout his entire eyeball. "Keep it," he finally said, and walked out into the darkness with his cart full of raw meat. I should have washed my hands immediately. In nursing school, they drill hand hygiene into you constantly. 20 seconds with soap, dry thoroughly, use sanitizer. But we were in the middle of a rush, and I was alone on register. 3 more customers came through in the next 15 minutes, and I handled their money, their credit cards, their groceries, all with that clear fluid still sticky on my fingers. By morning, there was a small red spot on my left index finger where the fluid had been. The next night, he came back. Same routine, meat department, raw hamburger, exact change. But this time I got a better look at those holes in his skin. They weren't random, they formed a pattern, starting at his fingertips and working up his arms in perfect spirals. And they were moving. The fluid inside them pulsed with his heartbeat, and occasionally something small and dark would dart just beneath the surface. I wore latex gloves that night, but it didn't matter. 3 more people just like him came in during my shift, all pale, all covered in those spiraling holes, all buying nothing but raw meat. One was a woman who used to work the deli counter until she quit for health reasons last month. I recognized her, even though her hair had gone completely white and her face looked like it had been carved from soap. The spot on my finger had grown. What started as a small red bump now had that same crater shape, with raised edges and a dark center that wept clear fluid when I pressed on it. I told myself it was just an infected cut, maybe from a paper edge or a sharp corner on the register. But when I looked at it under the bathroom's fluorescent lights, I could swear I saw something moving in the fluid. By the end of that week, I had 3 more spots, one on my wrist, one on my forearm, and one on my neck just below my ear. The campus health center was useless. The nurse glanced at them for maybe 5 seconds and diagnosed contact dermatitis, probably from harsh cleaning chemicals. She gave me a tube of steroid cream and told me to wear gloves while working. The cream made it worse. Much worse. Within hours of applying it, the spots had doubled in size and turned an angry red-black color. The fluid coming out of them changed too, becoming thicker and taking on this rotten sweet smell that reminded me of overripe fruit. But the worst part was what was happening to my appetite. Food that I'd loved my entire life suddenly tasted like cardboard and sawdust. Cooked meat made me nauseous. The smell of anything heated up in our break room microwave made me dry heave. My stomach felt constantly empty, but nothing satisfied the hunger. Until I found myself standing in front of the meat department at 3 a.m. during my break, staring at packages of ground beef through the glass case. My mouth was watering so hard I had to swallow constantly. Without really thinking about it, I opened the case, peeled back the plastic wrap on a package, and ate a handful of raw hamburger. It was the most delicious thing I'd ever tasted. Rich, metallic, with this underlying sweetness that made me want more. I ate the entire package, then another. By the time I realized what I was doing, I'd consumed nearly 2 pounds of raw ground beef, and my stomach finally felt satisfied for the first time in days. I tried to tell myself it was just stress eating, some weird psychological reaction to school pressure and work exhaustion. But I knew that wasn't true. Something was changing in my body, something fundamental and irreversible. The holes were spreading faster now. I counted 12 on my left arm, 15 on my right, and at least 20 on my torso. They formed perfect spirals, just like on the pale customers. And they were deeper. I could insert the tip of my little finger into some of them without hitting bottom. The fluid that seeped out had taken on a life of its own, pulsing and moving like it had tiny hearts beating inside it. My sleep schedule had completely flipped. Daylight felt oppressive. like it was physically pressing down on my skin. I'd lie in bed with blackout curtains drawn, feeling restless and agitated until the sun went down. Then I'd feel completely alert and energized, like my body was running on a different kind of fuel. The heated areas of the store became unbearable. My normal break spot by the coffee machine felt like standing next to a furnace. Instead, I found myself spending my breaks in the frozen food aisles, where the temperature hovered just above freezing. My body temperature was dropping, but I felt more comfortable that way, like my internal thermostat had been reset to match something else entirely. 3 weeks after the first pale customer, I started recognizing a pattern. The people with the holes weren't random strangers. They were former employees. Janet from the deli, Marcus from the stock team, David from the pharmacy, Linda from the bakery. All people who had worked at the store until they developed mysterious skin conditions and either quit or got transferred to night shifts, but they hadn't really left. They were still here, shopping exclusively during the darkest hours, buying nothing but raw meat, and they were watching me with this knowing look, like they recognized what was happening and were waiting for something. I started digging into the store's employment records during my breaks. What I found made my stomach turn. For the past 3 years, every few months, an employee would develop unexplained skin lesions and either quit or get moved to overnight positions. The medical reports all listed contact dermatitis or eczema, but the photos in their files showed the same spiral pattern of holes that I was developing. And they all had one thing in common. They'd all worked in or near the meat department. I gained access to the walk-in freezer during a particularly slow night. Way in the back, behind pallets of normal inventory, I found a section that wasn't on any official store map. Boxes marked with symbols instead of words, containing meat that didn't look like anything I'd seen before. It was gray-red and marbled with black veins, and it smelled sweet and rotten at the same time. No USDA stamps, no expiration dates, no identification at all. When I touched one of the packages with my bare hand, the holes in my skin started pulsing faster. The fluid inside them began moving more actively, and I felt this wave of hunger so intense it made me dizzy. I grabbed a handful of the strange meat and shoved it in my mouth before I could stop myself. It tasted like liquid euphoria, like every craving I'd ever had satisfied at once. That's when I understood. The meat wasn't from any normal animal. It was from something that had been found in the permafrost north of the city, something ancient that had been waiting in the ice for thousands of years. The company had been mixing it into their regular meat supply to cut costs, selling it to unsuspecting customers, and feeding it to employees through the subsidized meal program. But by then, understanding didn't matter. I was too far gone. My skin had become translucent. I could see my blood vessels branching underneath like dark rivers, and my veins had taken on that same black marbling as the meat. The holes covered most of my body now, spiraling from my fingertips to my torso in perfect mathematical patterns. And they weren't empty anymore. Small, dark shapes moved inside them, sometimes poking tiny tendrils out into the air before disappearing back into the fluid. I couldn't eat anything except raw meat, and only the special kind from the hidden freezer. Regular beef tasted flat and lifeless. But the ancient meat, the stuff that came from the permafrost, that fed something deeper than hunger. It fed whatever I was becoming. The worst part wasn't the physical transformation. It was the way my mind was changing. I stopped seeing the healthy customers as people and started seeing them as opportunities. When they handed me money or credit cards, I'd make sure the fluid from my holes got on everything. Most of them never noticed the slight stickiness or the sweet smell. But some did. They'd look at their hands afterward with confusion, maybe wipe them on their clothes. By the time they got home, they'd have a small red spot where the fluid had touched their skin. In a few days, it would start to crater. Within a week, they'd be craving raw meat. I could sense the other infected people now, not through sight or sound, but through some kind of shared awareness that hummed in my bones. We were connected, part of something larger. Management knew what was happening. Mr. Henderson, the night manager, had holes spiraling up his neck, though he hid them with makeup and high collars. The meat department supervisor, the pharmacy manager, even some of the day shift people had the same markers of infection. The CDC showed up in March to investigate reports of a mysterious skin condition affecting dozens of people in Anchorage. But the infected officials in the health department made sure their investigation went nowhere. Test samples got contaminated. Paperwork disappeared. Witnesses developed memory problems. The whole thing got classified as a minor outbreak of contact dermatitis caused by harsh winter weather and industrial cleaning products. By April, when the sun started staying up for more than a few hours, we'd learned to avoid daylight entirely. The UV radiation felt like acid on our transformed skin, forcing us underground during the bright months. But that was fine. We had work to do in the darkness. The infection had spread beyond the store now. Every truck driver who delivered here took a little piece of us with them. Every tourist who shopped during our brief summer season went home with more than souvenirs. We were in the money supply, the credit card readers, the shopping carts, the door handles. I still work the overnight shift at SafeWay. I still smile and ask customers if they found everything okay, but now I make sure they find something extra. Something they'll carry with them long after they leave Alaska. Because here's what I learned during those 67 days of darkness. Humanity isn't the end point of evolution. We're just another step, another temporary arrangement of matter that's destined to become something else. Something better adapted to the world that's coming. The ancient thing in the permafrost isn't an infection or a parasite. It's an upgrade. It's what we're supposed to become when the sun finally dies and the world returns to the darkness where life began. And every winter, during the polar night, it wakes up a little more and pulls a few more of us toward our true nature. If you ever find yourself shopping late at night in a grocery store, and the cashier looks a little too pale, has unexplained marks on their hands, or seems oddly interested in touching your money, pay attention to that little voice in your head that says something's wrong. Because by the time you notice the sweet smell on your fingers, by the time you feel that first small bump forming on your skin, you're already becoming one of us. And honestly, you'll be grateful for the change. The hunger stops hurting, the cold becomes comfortable, and the darkness becomes home. The transformation doesn't happen overnight. It takes weeks, sometimes months, but eventually, you'll understand what we understand. You'll feel what we feel. And you'll realize that the thing in the permafrost isn't destroying humanity, it's completing us. Welcome to the next phase of evolution. Welcome to the real food chain. Welcome to what we've always been meant to become in the dark. My name is Marcus Johnson, and I've been driving for rideshare companies in Anchorage for 3 years. I started this job after getting laid off from the oil fields. Needed steady income to support my wife, Sarah, and our 2 kids. During Alaska's polar night season, when the sun doesn't rise for months, I work the 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. shift. That's when people need rides most. Bar pickups, airport runs, hospital visits, late shift workers heading home. I know every street in this city like the back of my hand. After 8,000 rides and a 4.9-star rating, I've driven down every road, through every neighborhood, picked up passengers from every corner of Anchorage. My 2019 Toyota Camry has winter tires, a dash cam, and a phone mount for GPS. On good nights during winter, I make around $180. It's not oilfield money, but it pays the bills. February 2024 was the deepest part of polar night. Complete darkness 24 hours a day. The cold was brutal, minus 20 degrees most nights. But that's when ride requests come in steady. People don't want to walk to their cars in that weather. Everything was normal until February 15th. I remember the date exactly because it was the night everything started going wrong. I just dropped off a passenger at the airport around 11 p.m. when my phone pinged with a new ride request. The pickup location showed an address on Fireweed Lane, which I knew well. But when I got there, something felt off. The street looked different. Same name on the GPS, but the buildings weren't right. Instead of the usual strip mall and office complex, there were tall glass towers that I'd never seen before. I figured maybe I was on the wrong block. Happens sometimes when you're tired. I drove around looking for the right address, but every building looked wrong. Too modern, too tall for Anchorage. My GPS kept insisting I was in the right place, but my eyes told me different. Then my passenger appeared. A woman in her 40s, well-dressed, carrying a briefcase. She got in and said, "Thanks for picking me up. Airport, please." Normal enough, except when she handed me her phone to confirm the destination, the screen looked weird. Same basic smartphone design, but the icons were different. The interface was cleaner, more advanced than anything I'd seen. During the drive, she made small talk about the weather, but she kept mentioning things that didn't make sense. She talked about the snow trains running late because of the storm. Anchorage doesn't have trains. When I pointed this out, she looked at me funny and said, "What do you mean? The snow trains have been running for 15 years. I dropped her off at the airport, but even that looked different. Same basic structure, but there were extra terminals I'd never noticed before. The woman paid through the app, but when I checked my earnings later, it showed she'd paid with some kind of digital currency I didn't recognize. I tried to shake it off. Maybe I was just tired, seeing things wrong in the darkness. But then it happened again the next night. And the night after that, ride requests kept coming from addresses that led to buildings that shouldn't exist. Passengers who talked about Anchorage like it was a completely different city. They mentioned restaurants I'd never heard of, neighborhoods that didn't exist, political leaders whose names meant nothing to me. One passenger, a middle-aged man heading to what he called downtown, kept talking about how different things were since the war ended in '47. When I asked what war, he stared at me like I was crazy. World War II, obviously. When we negotiated the peace treaty, instead of dropping those bombs, that's when I realized these people were talking about a version of history that never happened. In their world, World War II ended differently. Alaska never became a U.S. state. They had technology that seemed years ahead of ours. Better smartphones, electric cars everywhere, public transportation systems that didn't exist in my Anchorage. The scariest part was how normal they all seemed. They weren't ghosts or monsters. They were just regular people living in what appeared to be the same city, but in a completely different reality. I started paying closer attention to the GPS during these weird rides. The street names were slightly different. Roads I knew by heart had different names. Familiar intersections led to parts of the city that shouldn't exist. My dashcam recorded everything, but when I reviewed the footage later, it showed me driving through normal Anchorage streets, not the altered version I remembered seeing. During the day, everything went back to normal. The strange buildings disappeared. The streets returned to their familiar layout. But every night during my shift, the city transformed into something else. Something that looked like Anchorage but wasn't quite right. I started keeping a notebook, writing down details from these rides. The passengers' strange comments, the wrong street names, the buildings that shouldn't exist. I showed it to Sarah, but she was worried I was working too hard, not getting enough sleep. Then one night in late February, I picked up a passenger who changed everything. He was a scientist, or at least he claimed to be. Dr. Richardson, heading to what he called the University Research Center. Problem was, the University of Alaska Anchorage doesn't have a research center at the address he gave me. During the ride, he started asking me questions. Personal questions. About my family, my job history, even about specific events in my life. It felt less like small talk and more like an interview. When I asked why he wanted to know, he said something that made my blood run cold. We've been monitoring dimensional crossover events during polar night. You're one of the few baseline humans who can consistently access our reality. We need to understand how. I almost pulled over right there. What do you mean, baseline humans? He explained that during Anchorage's polar night, the complete darkness creates weak points between parallel realities. Most people can't perceive the crossover, but some, like me, can slip between dimensions without realizing it. Every night, I was picking up passengers from a parallel version of Anchorage, one where history unfolded differently. In our timeline, he said, the oil industry developed differently. Alaska became a major tech hub instead of just an oil state. We solved climate change decades ago. But our society has problems yours doesn't. He told me that people from his reality had been studying ours, trying to understand the differences. They'd identified several crossover drivers, people like me, who could somehow navigate between the two anchorages during the polar night period. When I dropped him off at his research center, he handed me a device that looked like an advanced GPS unit. If you want to understand what's happening to you, use this tomorrow night. It'll show you both realities simultaneously. I took the device home, but I was too scared to tell Sarah about the conversation. How do you explain to your wife that you might be driving passengers from a parallel universe? The next night, I used Dr. Richardson's device. The screen split into two views, one showing the normal Anchorage I knew, the other showing the advanced version with different buildings, extra infrastructure, and technology that looked decades ahead of ours. As I watched, the GPS flickered between both realities. I could see the exact moments when I crossed from one dimension to the other. It usually happened in areas with no streetlights, where the darkness was complete. That night, I picked up more passengers from the other reality, but this time, they seemed different, more urgent. Several of them mentioned something about timeline convergence and dimensional instability. One woman, a government worker from their version of Alaska, warned me that the crossover events were becoming more frequent and more dangerous. Both realities are starting to merge, she said. If it continues, neither timeline will survive intact. The physics can't handle it. She explained that their scientists had detected signs that our two realities were on a collision course. During polar night, the boundaries between dimensions weakened so much that the two anchorages were bleeding into each other. Buildings from their reality were appearing in ours. People were getting lost between timelines. Some of our people have tried to stay in your reality, she said, and some of yours have disappeared into ours. The crossover is becoming permanent for some individuals. I started noticing changes in my own reality. Streets that should have been familiar looked different during daylight. Sarah mentioned that our neighbors had been acting strange, like they didn't quite remember who we were. My kids came home from school talking about teachers and classmates I'd never heard of. The most terrifying moment came when I picked up a passenger who looked exactly like my wife, Sarah. Same face, same voice, same mannerisms, but she didn't recognize me. She talked about her husband, Marcus, who worked in the tech industry, and her children with different names than our kids. I drove her home in silence, realizing I was looking at Sarah from the parallel reality, one where we'd never met, or met under different circumstances. When I got home that night, I stared at my real Sarah, wondering if she was still the same person I'd married, or if she'd been somehow replaced during one of these dimensional crossover events. The polar night was scheduled to end in just a few more days. Sunrise was coming, which according to Dr. Richardson and his colleagues, would stabilize the dimensional boundaries. But they'd also warned me that the crossover events were reaching a critical point. Soon, I'd have to choose which reality I wanted to live in permanently. The parallel Anchorage offered advanced technology, solutions to climate change, and better economic opportunities. Their version of my family seemed happier, more successful. But it wasn't my reality. These weren't the people I'd built my life with. On the final night of polar night, the crossover events reached their peak. My GPS showed both realities simultaneously, buildings from both dimensions occupying the same space. I picked up passengers from both timelines in the same trip. Some begged me to take them to the other reality permanently. Others desperately wanted to get back to their original dimension before dawn. As the sun finally began to rise over Anchorage, I made my choice. I drove home to my reality, to my Sarah and my children, watching the advanced buildings from the parallel dimension fade away in my mirrors as daylight strengthened the barriers between worlds. The dimensional crossovers stopped with the return of sunlight. My GPS went back to showing only one version of Anchorage. The strange passengers disappeared, and my rideshare app returned to normal bookings. But I kept Dr. Richardson's device, and I still have my notebook full of details from those weeks when I drove between realities. I'm still driving rideshare in Anchorage, still working the night shift, though I stick to daylight hours now when I can. My family is back to normal, or at least they're the versions of my family I remember. Sometimes I pick up passengers who seem confused about where they are, who talk about streets that don't exist or mention events that never happened in our timeline. I think they're people who got lost between dimensions during polar night and haven't found their way back yet. When that happens, I don't charge them for the ride. I just listen to their stories and try to help them figure out where they really belong. Because I know what it's like to be caught between two realities, never quite sure which world is real. Polar night is coming again next winter. And when it does, I'll be ready. The device is charged, the notebook is ready for new entries. Because somewhere out there in the darkness, between the dimensions, there are still people who need a ride home. My name is Tyler Brooks, and I've been delivering pizzas in Fairbanks, Alaska for 2 years. I started this job when I was 22, working part-time while studying at the University of Alaska. The pay isn't great, but with student loans piling up, I needed something that would give me decent tips. Marco's Pizza was the only place in town that stayed open for deliveries during polar night. Those 67 days when the sun doesn't come up at all. Most people think that sounds crazy, but the tips during polar night are amazing. People get desperate for hot food when it's dark all the time. I know every street in Fairbanks like the back of my hand. After 2 years of driving these routes, I could probably navigate them blindfolded. My Honda Civic isn't much to look at, but it's reliable in the cold. I keep emergency supplies in the trunk: blanket, flashlight, energy bars, phone charger. Working nights in Alaska, you don't take chances. The company has strict safety rules. We have to check in with the store every 2 hours using our radio system. If we don't call in, they send someone to find us. We also carry GPS trackers, so dispatch knows where we are at all times. Marco takes driver safety seriously. He's lost delivery guys before to weather and accidents. My usual shift runs from 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. That's when most people order dinner time and late-night munchies. A lot of my customers are college students like me, families with kids, and folks working late shifts at Alaskan Air Force Base. During polar night, business actually picks up. There's something about the endless darkness that makes people crave hot food and human contact. January 15th started like any other night. I clocked in at 6, loaded up my insulated bags, and checked my route list. The first few deliveries went smoothly. A family pizza to Cowles Street, some breadsticks to a dorm on campus. The GPS worked fine, customers were where they were supposed to be, and I was making good time. Then things got weird. Around 9 p.m., I got an order for 1247 Gillum Way. I knew that street well. Nice neighborhood with bigger houses. But when I plugged the address into my GPS, it showed me a route I'd never seen before. Instead of the usual left turn off Cushman Street, it wanted me to go straight for another mile, then turn right onto what looked like a new road. I figured maybe they'd built some new streets. Fairbanks is growing, and construction happens even in winter. I followed the GPS directions, driving down roads that seemed familiar but somehow different. The street signs were there, but they looked newer than I remembered. The houses were the right style, but arranged differently than I expected. When I found 1247 Gillum Way, it looked exactly like every other house on the block. 2-story, beige siding, covered porch, a normal Fairbanks house. But something felt off. I delivered to this neighborhood dozens of times, and I could have sworn this particular house used to be blue, not beige. The customer who answered the door was friendly enough. Middle-aged guy named Jim, who knew my name even though I'd never met him. He tipped well and seemed normal. But when I got back to my car, I noticed something strange. My GPS showed I'd driven 4 miles to make this delivery. The real Gillum Way was only 2 miles from the store. I called it in to dispatch. "Hey Marcus, GPS is acting weird tonight." Showed a longer route to Gillum Way than usual. Marcus sounded distracted. "GPS problems again? That's the 3rd driver this week. Just use your regular routes if the computer's messing up." The next delivery was even stranger. The address was 892 10th Avenue, which should have been a quick 5-minute drive. But my GPS took me down streets I'd never seen before, even though the street names were familiar. I passed 3 different houses with the exact same mailbox design, same landscaping, even the same car parked in the driveway. It was like driving through a neighborhood of identical copies. When I finally found the right address, the customer, a woman named Sarah, greeted me like an old friend. "Tyler, right on time as always. How's school going?" I'd never met this woman before in my life, but she knew my name, knew I was in college, and talked like we'd had this conversation many times. When I told her I thought she had me confused with someone else, she looked genuinely puzzled. "Tyler Brooks, right? You've been delivering our pizzas for months. Always punctual, always polite. Here's your usual tip." She handed me a $20 bill. I took the money and got out of there fast. Something was seriously wrong. The radio crackled as I drove to my next stop. "Unit 7, this is dispatch. Please respond." That was weird. Unit 7 was my call sign. But the voice wasn't Marcus. It sounded like Tony, who used to work dispatch but quit 6 months ago. I grabbed the radio. "This is Unit 7. Marcus, is that you?" Static. Then a different voice. Tyler, where are you? You missed your 2-hour check-in. I looked at my clock. It showed 9:47 p.m. I'd only been gone an hour and a half. Marcus, it's only been 90 minutes. I'm not due to check in until 10:30. More static. Then, Tyler, it's almost midnight. You've been gone over 5 hours. That was impossible. I looked at my phone, then at the car's dashboard clock, then at my watch. They all showed different times. My phone said 9:47. The car clock said 11:53. My watch showed 7:22. My hands started shaking. I tried calling the store directly, but my phone kept getting a busy signal. The radio wasn't working right either. I was picking up conversations between drivers, but they were talking about deliveries to streets that didn't exist. Someone was discussing a route to Shadow Creek Road and complaining about deliveries to the mirror houses on Phantom Street. I'd been delivering pizzas in Fairbanks for 2 years. There was no Shadow Creek Road. There was no Phantom Street. That's when I realized I was completely lost. I was driving down what looked like a normal residential street, but nothing looked quite right. The houses were familiar but wrong, like someone had built copies of real neighborhoods but gotten all the details slightly off. Street signs showed names I recognized, but the roads didn't go where they were supposed to. My GPS showed I was driving in circles, but I was definitely going straight. I pulled over and tried to get my bearings. According to my GPS, I was simultaneously on Cushman Street, Airport Way, and Old Richardson Highway. That was physically impossible. Those roads were miles apart. The radio crackled again. Unit 7, please respond. But this time, the voice was my own. I was hearing myself on the radio, calling for myself. I threw the radio down and tried to drive back to the store using landmarks I knew. But every time I thought I recognized a building or intersection, it would lead somewhere completely different. The McDonald's on Cushman led to a residential area I'd never seen. The Walmart parking lot opened onto a road that shouldn't exist. After what felt like hours of driving, I stopped at a gas station to ask for directions. The attendant was a middle-aged man with graying hair and tired eyes. When he looked up and saw me, his face went white. "You're new," he said quietly. "New to what?" "I just need directions back to Marco's Pizza on." "How long you been driving tonight?" "I don't know. My clocks are all messed up. Maybe 3 hours?" He nodded sadly. "I've been here 14 years. That didn't make sense." "Here, at this gas station?" "Here in the delivery zone. Been making deliveries for 14 years, ever since I got lost during Polar Night in 2010. He gestured to a pizza delivery bag on the counter behind him. "Name's Dave. Used to work for Pizza Palace before they went out of business." My stomach dropped. Pizza Palace had closed in 2009, before I even moved to Alaska. "That's impossible. You can't have been making deliveries for 14 years. How do you eat? Where do you sleep?" Dave laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Don't need to eat much here. Don't get very tired either. The thing that runs this place, it keeps us going, keeps us useful." "What thing?" "The shadow feeder, that's what we call it. Lives in the darkness between the real world and this place. During Polar Night, when it's dark all the time, it can create copies of the real city. Trap people who drive alone at night. Delivery drivers, cab drivers, cops on patrol, people who have to be out in the dark." I backed toward the door. "You're crazy. This is some kind of joke. Check your gas tank." I looked down at my fuel gauge. Still full, even though I'd been driving for hours. "Your car doesn't run on gas here. Runs on hope. And that's what it feeds on. The hope that you'll find your way home, that someone will rescue you, that this is all just a bad dream." Dave pulled out a map and spread it on the counter. It showed Fairbanks, but there were 2 versions overlapping each other. One looked normal. The other was covered in red marks and strange notations. Red areas are controlled by the shadow feeder. That's where the mirror houses are, where the fake customers live. The thing creates them to keep us busy, to keep us believing we're still doing our jobs. Makes us feel useful while it slowly drains away our hope and our connection to the real world. How many drivers are here? 12 that I know of. Maybe more. Some have been here so long they've forgotten they're trapped. They think this is normal. I studied the map. There has to be a way out. There is, but it's dangerous, and it only works during the twilight hours. What twilight hours? It's Polar Night. There's no twilight. Dave pointed to his watch. There's still a little bit of twilight each day, around noon. 2 hours when the sky gets slightly less dark. The shadow feeder's power is weakest then. That's when the barriers between this place and the real world get thin. How do you know all this? Trial and error. Lost a lot of good drivers learning the rules. Dave folded up the map. If you want to try to escape, you need to wait until tomorrow at 11 a.m. Drive to the northern edge of the mirror zone, right where Steese Highway meets the real world. There's a spot where you can break through if you hit it at exactly the right moment. I spent the rest of the night driving around the mirror zone, delivering pizzas to fake customers in fake houses, trying to wrap my head around what was happening. The shadow feeder kept me busy with constant deliveries, but I started noticing the patterns Dave had mentioned. Customers who ordered the same thing every time. Houses that were identical inside. People who knew my name but had no real memories. At 10:45 a.m., I drove north toward the Steese Highway. Dave had marked the escape point on a hand-drawn map, a place where the road curved around a stand of birch trees. You'll know you're close when you start feeling sick, he'd told me. The thing doesn't want you to leave. Sure enough, as I approached the marked spot, I felt like I was going to throw up. My vision blurred, my hands started shaking, and something in the back of my mind was screaming at me to turn around. At exactly 11:47 a.m., when the sky was the closest to gray it would get all day, I floored the gas pedal and drove straight into what looked like empty air. There was a moment of crushing pressure, like diving deep underwater. Then suddenly, I was back on the real Steese Highway, with normal traffic and normal buildings and a normal sky. I drove straight to Marco's Pizza. Marcus was behind the counter, looking annoyed. "Where the hell have you been? You left for deliveries 12 hours ago." I checked my phone. 12:23 p.m., January 16th. I'd been gone all night, but only 30 minutes had passed in the real world. I got lost. Lost? Tyler, you know this city better than anyone. How do you get lost making deliveries? I tried to explain what had happened, but it sounded crazy even to me. Marcus thought I was on drugs and fired me on the spot. I went to the police and filed a missing persons report for Dave and the other trapped drivers. They looked at me like I was nuts and filed it under mental health incident. I've never driven for delivery again. Can't handle being alone in a car at night, especially during winter. I switched to construction work, day shifts only, and moved to Anchorage the following year. But every winter, when polar night starts in Fairbanks, I check the missing persons reports online. And every year, a few more delivery drivers disappear without a trace. I know where they are. Still out there in the mirror zone, making deliveries to customers who don't exist, slowly forgetting that they were ever part of the real world. Sometimes I think about going back, trying to rescue them. But I'm scared that if I return to those dark roads during polar night, the shadow feeder will be waiting for me. And this time, I might not be strong enough to escape. If you're ever driving alone at night in Alaska during the dark season, and your GPS starts showing you streets you don't recognize, turn around immediately. Don't trust the customers who know your name. Don't trust the clocks that show impossible times. And whatever you do, don't let yourself get trapped in the space between the real world and the shadows. Because once the darkness has you, it might never let you go. My name is Robert Thompson, and I've been driving school buses for 12 years here in rural Alaska. I hold a Class B CDL with passenger and school bus endorsements, plus wilderness survival certification that's required for drivers in our district. I've navigated through blizzards that would shut down highways, gotten kids home safely when temperatures dropped to 40 below, and I know every pothole and dangerous curve on my 150-mile route. I've always prided myself on getting every child home safe, no matter what Mother Nature throws at us. But what happened this December changed everything I thought I knew about my job. Because some passengers on my bus weren't supposed to be there at all. I drive Route 47, which covers 8 remote villages in the Bethel area. My bus is a modified Bluebird with extra insulation, emergency food supplies, satellite communication gear, and enough fuel to run the heater for 12 hours if we get stranded. Every morning at 6 a.m., I pick up 45 native Alaskan kids, ages 6 to 12, and bring them to the central school. Then I drive them all back home before 4 p.m., racing against the darkness that swallows everything during our polar night season. December in Alaska means no sun at all. The kids board my bus in complete darkness. ride to school in darkness, and I bring them home in darkness. It affects everyone differently. Some kids get quiet and withdrawn. Others become hyperactive, like they're fighting against the endless night. But they're good kids, and after 12 years, I know most of their families. Their safety is my responsibility, and I take that seriously. The first time I noticed something was wrong happened on December 3rd, about 2 weeks into the darkest part of winter. I was doing my afternoon route, had just picked up the kids from Mountain Village, and was heading toward my next stop. I always count heads before we move. It's basic safety protocol. 45 kids were registered that day, and I counted 45 kids in my mirrors. But when I got to Pilot Station, Mrs. Kanguk came up to me looking confused. "Robert, my grandson Tommy says there were extra kids on the bus today. Said there were children he didn't recognize sitting in the back rows." I checked my passenger manifest against my count. 45 kids on the list, 45 kids I'd counted. I explained that to her, but she just frowned and said Tommy was sure about what he'd seen. That night, I went over my route logs 3 times. Everything matched, but something about the conversation bothered me. The next day, during my morning pickup in Kwethluk, 8-year-old Sarah Vent came up to me as she boarded. "Mr. Robert, the sad kids in the back want to know if you can hear them singing." I looked in my rearview mirror. The back 3 rows were completely empty. Those kids hadn't boarded yet. "What sad kids, honey?" "The ones who are always cold. They sing the old songs my grandma taught me, but they sing them really quiet." A chill ran down my spine, but I kept my voice steady. "Let's get everyone on board first, okay?" As we loaded up and headed towards school, I kept checking my mirrors. Every time I looked, I saw exactly the kids who should be there. But twice, just for a split second, when I glanced up quickly, I could swear I saw additional faces in the back rows. When I looked directly at them, they were gone. The radio started acting up that week. Static would come and go without any weather to cause it. But the weird part was that sometimes, underneath the static, I could hear children's voices. Not my kids, they'd be talking normally, while these other voices seemed to come from inside the radio itself. Soft, sad voices speaking in Yupik, which I only understood a little bit. I mentioned the radio problems to my supervisor, Dale Morrison. When I got back to the depot, "Probably just interference from the new cell tower they put up near Bethel," he said. "I'll have maintenance check it out." But maintenance couldn't find anything wrong with the radio. By December 10th, more kids were mentioning the extra passengers. Not all of them, just the younger ones, mostly. They'd ask me things like, "Why don't the quiet kids ever get off the bus?" Or, "Can you turn the heat up for the cold children?" I started keeping a closer eye on the temperature gauge. The bus heating system was working fine, but several times during the route, the interior temperature would drop 15 or 20 degrees for no reason. It would happen suddenly, and I'd watch my breath fog up while the kids in the front would start putting on their gloves. The kids in the back rows never seemed to notice the cold. That's when I decided to do some research. I drove to the Bethel Library after my route and asked about any historical incidents involving school buses in our area. The librarian, an elderly Yupik woman named Mary, got very quiet when I explained what I was looking for. "You're driving the old Route 12, she said. "They changed the numbers after what happened." She brought out newspaper clippings from December 1952. The headline made my blood run cold. 12 children perish in bus accident on winter route. The article described how a school bus carrying children from several villages had gone through thin ice while crossing a frozen creek. The driver and 12 children had drowned. The accident happened on December 15th, 1952, on the exact route I was now driving. The bus had been traveling from Pilot Station to Mountain Village when it broke through ice that locals had warned was too thin to cross. The families never recovered some of the bodies until spring, Mary told me. The children were buried in the old cemetery near Pilot Station. Some people say their spirits never found their way home. I stared at the old black and white photos of the children. Their faces looked familiar, though I couldn't place where I might have seen them. That afternoon, as I was loading kids at Mountain Village, 9-year-old Peter Yupp came up to my seat. "Mr. Robert, the kids in the back say they want to go home, but they can't remember where home is. They've been riding the bus a long time." I looked in my mirror. The back rows were full of my regular students, but Peter was looking at an empty seat beside him and nodding as if someone was talking to him. "Peter, can you see these kids?" "Yes, sir. They're wearing old clothes, and they look really sad. The girl next to me says her name is Anna, and she's been cold since 1952. My hands started shaking on the steering wheel. 1952. The same year as the accident. That night, I called my wife Linda and told her everything. She suggested I take some time off, maybe see a doctor. But I couldn't abandon my route, especially not with winter getting worse. These kids depended on me. The next morning, December 11th, I decided to stop at Pilot Station Cemetery before my route. It's not something I'd normally do, but I needed to see those graves. The cemetery was mostly snow-covered, but I found them. 12 small headstones in a row, with dates from December 15th, 1952. Some of the names matched what the kids had been telling me. Anna, Peter, Michael, Sarah, but different last names than my current students. As I stood there in the pre-dawn darkness, I heard something that made my heart stop. Children singing. Traditional Yupik songs, the same ones I'd been hearing through the radio static. The voices were coming from the direction of the graves. I got back to my bus and tried to start it. The engine turned over, but the radio immediately crackled to life with static. Through the interference, I heard a child's voice, clear as day. "Please, Mr. Bus Driver, we want to go home." That afternoon, the phantom passengers became impossible to ignore. Every kid on the bus started talking to empty seats. The temperature dropped so low that ice formed on the inside of the windows, even though the heater was running full blast. And for the first time, I heard them clearly myself. 12 young voices, singing sadly in the back of my bus. When I looked in the mirror, I could see them. 12 children in old-fashioned winter clothes, sitting in the back rows with my regular students. They looked exactly like the children in the 1952 newspaper photos. My regular kids seemed completely comfortable with them. 8-year-old Lisa was sharing her snacks with an empty seat. Tommy was playing a hand-clapping game with invisible partners. They treated these phantom children like they'd been riding together all year. I pulled over at a safe spot and turned around in my seat. I could see all 12 ghost children clearly now. They were pale and translucent, but definitely there. The oldest looked about 10 years old, the youngest maybe 6. They all stared at me with hopeful eyes. "What do you need?" I asked out loud. My regular students looked at me like this was a perfectly normal question. "They want to go home, Mr. Robert," said Tommy. "But they got lost a long time ago." The ghost girl in the back row, Anna, I realized, spoke in a voice like wind through ice. "We've been riding the bus, trying to find our families. But we can't get off until we reach home." "Where is home?" I asked. "The old burial ground," she whispered, "near the place where the ice broke. Our families are waiting for us there." I knew the place she meant. It was an ancient cemetery about 50 miles off my regular route, near where the 1952 accident had happened. The old burial ground where many of the village families had been laid to rest for generations. But taking the bus 50 miles off route would violate every safety protocol in the book. I could lose my job, face criminal charges for endangering children, or worse, get lost in a blizzard with 45 living kids depending on me. That night, I called Mary at the library. She listened to everything I told her, then sighed deeply. "My grandmother was one of the families who lost a child in that accident," she said. "She always said those children would ride the winter bus until someone helped them find their way to the ancestors. December 15th is coming, that's the anniversary. They'll all be on your bus that day. What am I supposed to do? What your heart tells you is right." December 15th arrived with the worst blizzard we'd had all season. The school district called me at 5 a.m. and said they were considering canceling routes due to weather conditions. But this was the day. I could feel it. "I can handle it," I told my supervisor. "These kids need to get to school." That wasn't exactly true. What these kids needed was to get home. When I arrived at my first pickup, all 45 of my regular students were waiting, bundled up against the cold. But as they boarded, I could see the phantom passengers boarding too, all 12 of them, clearer than they'd ever been. They looked hopeful but scared, like children who'd been lost for 70 years and finally saw their parents coming to pick them up. The living kids greeted their phantom companions like old friends. They offered to share snacks, helped them find seats, and started singing songs together, the same traditional songs I'd been hearing all month. As we drove through the blizzard, the phantom children began to speak to me directly. "Mr. Thompson," Anna said, "today is the day we can go home. But only if you take us to the old cemetery. Our families are waiting." I looked at my route map, then at the 45 living children, counting on me to keep them safe. Taking them 50 miles off route in a blizzard was insane. But leaving 12 children's spirits to wander lost for another year felt wrong too. "Kids," I announced to the bus, "we're going to make a special stop today." Not one of my regular students complained. It was like they understood this was important. The drive to the old cemetery took 2 hours through the worst weather I'd ever driven in. My satellite phone kept the school district updated on our location, and I could hear the panic in Dale's voice every time he called. But the phantom children guided me, pointing out safe paths and warning me about dangerous ice. When we finally reached the ancient burial ground, something amazing happened. As soon as I stopped the bus, the 12 phantom children stood up together. They turned to thank my regular students, hugging invisible hugs and making promises to watch over them. Then they looked at me. "Thank you for taking us home," Anna said. "Our families are here now. We can rest." Through the blizzard, I could see figures waiting among the old graves, translucent adults who had been buried there generations ago, waiting to welcome their children home. The 12 ghost children walked off my bus and into the arms of their families. As they embraced, they all faded away, finally at peace. The drive back to the villages was the smoothest I'd ever had, despite the blizzard. It was like the phantom children were still helping, making sure their living friends got home safely. When I got back to the depot, I faced a disciplinary hearing for unauthorized route deviation. The school district threatened to fire me until the families from all 8 villages came forward. They told the board about their children's experiences, about the phantom passengers, and about how important it was to help lost spirits find peace. The school board, many of whom were native Alaskan, understood. They officially authorized an annual memorial route on December 15th, allowing drivers to visit the old cemetery to honor the children who died in 1952. I still drive Route 47, and I love my job more than ever. My regular kids learned something important that winter, that helping others, even those who are gone, is part of what makes us human. And every December 15th, we make our special stop at the old cemetery, just in case any other lost spirits need a ride home. The phantom passengers never returned. They're finally at peace, reunited with their families in the place where they belong. But sometimes, on the coldest winter nights, I still hear children singing traditional songs on my radio. Not sad songs anymore, but happy ones. The songs of children who made it home. My name is Maria Gonzalez, and I've been a commercial building custodian for 12 years. I started cleaning small office buildings in Phoenix, worked my way up to shopping centers, and finally got hired at Millennium Tower in downtown Anchorage 5 years ago. It's a 40-story mixed-use complex with offices, restaurants, retail spaces, and a parking garage. 400,000 square feet of floors, windows, and surfaces that need cleaning every single night. I work the graveyard shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., completely alone. Most people think janitorial work is simple, but managing a building this size requires real skill. You need to know electrical systems, plumbing basics, security protocols, and emergency procedures. I'm first aid certified, trained on industrial equipment, and trusted with master keys to every door in the building. The management company pays me well because goodnight custodians are hard to find. But what happened during those long January nights in 2024 changed everything I thought I knew about the building I'd been cleaning for years. What I discovered wasn't just hidden in the basement or forgotten storage rooms. It was woven into the very structure itself, waiting for someone who spent enough time alone in those halls to finally see the truth. January in Anchorage means polar nights that stretch for nearly 20 hours. When I arrive at work, the sun set hours ago. When I leave in the morning, it's still dark. Millennium Tower becomes the only occupied building for miles, its lights cutting through the frozen darkness like a beacon. The building was constructed in 1987, replacing what used to be Anchorage General Hospital. That old hospital operated from the 1922nd until 1985, treating thousands of tuberculosis patients during the epidemic years. The city demolished it to make room for the modern office complex, but they kept some of the original foundation. My cleaning route is systematic. I start on the top floors and work my way down, using the service elevator to move between levels. First, I empty trash bins and recycling containers. Then I vacuum carpets, mop hard floors, clean restrooms and dust surfaces. The whole process takes exactly 8 hours if I don't get distracted. I know every office layout, every supply closet, every electrical panel. The accounting firm on the 20th floor always leaves coffee stains on their break room counter. The law office on 35 has a partner who works late and leaves candy wrappers everywhere. The medical clinic on 15 smells like antiseptic even after hours of cleaning. My equipment includes an industrial vacuum cleaner, floor buffer, chemical supplies, and a cart that holds everything. I have key cards for every door, codes for the elevator systems, and direct radio contact with building security. During winter nights like these, the heating system works overtime, but some floors still stay cold no matter what the thermostats say. On January 15th, everything started going wrong. I began my shift normally, taking the service elevator to the 40th floor. But when the doors opened, something felt off. The hallway stretched longer than usual, and the fluorescent lights flickered in a pattern I'd never seen before. I checked my cleaning checklist, floor 40, executive offices, standard procedure. But as I walked toward the first office, my footsteps echoed strangely, like the hallway was much bigger than it should be. The office layouts looked wrong too. I'd cleaned these same rooms hundreds of times, but tonight the desks were arranged differently. Conference rooms appeared where storage closets should be. Even the carpet color seemed different under the fluorescent lights. I figured maintenance had moved furniture around without telling me. It happens sometimes when companies reorganize. I started my cleaning routine anyway, but my vacuum cleaner kept turning on by itself. Even when I unplugged it, I could hear it running somewhere else in the building. The service elevator started acting up too. I'd press the button for floor 39, but it would stop at random levels instead. When the doors opened, I'd see identical office layouts that looked exactly like the floor I'd just finished cleaning. Same desks, same trash bins, same coffee stains that I'd already wiped up. My radio crackled with static. Building security usually checked in every hour, but tonight I couldn't reach anyone. The emergency communication system that connected to the main desk just played an endless dial tone. I tried to shake off the uneasiness. 12 years in this business taught me that buildings make strange noises at night. Equipment malfunctions, security guards take long breaks. There's always a logical explanation. But when I reached the medical clinic on the 15th floor, something made me stop cold. Through the frosted glass doors, I could see shapes moving inside. Tall shadows that looked like people walking around, even though the clinic had been closed for hours. I could hear voices too. Muffled conversations, and what sounded like medical equipment beeping. I unlocked the door with my master key and stepped inside. The clinic was empty, but it felt warm and active, like people had just been there. The air smelled strongly of antiseptic and something else I couldn't identify, old medicine maybe, or sickness. That's when I noticed my cleaning cart was already inside the room, even though I clearly remembered leaving it in the hallway. Not only that, but I'd apparently already cleaned the entire clinic. The floors were mopped, the trash was emptied, and the surfaces were dusted. I had no memory of doing any of that work. Over the next few nights, the building started changing more dramatically. Floors would expand beyond their architectural limits. I'd walk down a hallway that should have been 50 feet long, but it would stretch for hundreds of feet before reaching the end. Stairwells led to levels that didn't exist on the building directory. Water fountains flowed upward instead of down. My cleaning equipment began operating independently. I'd find my vacuum running in rooms I hadn't entered yet, cleaning carpets that were already spotless. The floor buffer would work through offices overnight, leaving perfect patterns on surfaces that didn't need buffing. The temperature became impossible to control. Some floors stayed frozen despite the heating system running at full capacity. Others became uncomfortably warm. I started carrying extra layers just to cope with the changing conditions. But the strangest thing was what I saw overlaying the normal office furniture. Hospital beds appeared in conference rooms. IV poles stood beside copy machines. Medical equipment from decades past flickered in and out of view, transparent but clearly present. I could hear heart monitors beeping, oxygen machines humming, and nurses talking in hushed voices about patient care. At first, I thought I was having a breakdown, working alone for years, dealing with the isolation of night shifts, it was bound to affect anyone eventually. But the building itself seemed to be guiding me, teaching me what it needed. I started finding medical supplies in my cleaning cart that I'd never put there. Bandages, antiseptic wipes, thermometers, and medications appeared alongside my normal cleaning chemicals. When I tried to remove them, they'd reappear the next night. The building was showing me its true purpose. This wasn't an office complex anymore. It was still the hospital it had always been, just hidden beneath layers of modern construction. The patients were still here, still needing care, still waiting for someone to help them. And somehow, I'd become their nurse. The knowledge came gradually, like memories I'd always had but forgotten. How to check vital signs on patients I couldn't see. How to administer medications to people who existed in a different time. How to comfort the dying and celebrate with those who recovered. My 8-hour cleaning shift expanded to 12 hours, then 14. The building provided what I needed. Food from restaurant kitchens that had been closed for hours, comfortable places to rest when I got tired, and heating that followed me from room to room. But if I tried to leave early or skip my patient care duties, the building became hostile. Elevators would malfunction, trapping me between floors. Lights would go out, leaving me in complete darkness. The heating would shut off, and the January cold would seep through the walls until I couldn't feel my fingers. The building wasn't evil. It was just doing what hospitals do, demanding that medical staff complete their duties before leaving their shift. The morning of February 1st changed everything. I was in the medical clinic, checking on a tuberculosis patient from 1943 who'd been struggling through the night. Her fever had broken, and she was finally resting comfortably. I was adjusting her IV line when the clinic door opened. Dr. Peterson, who rented the space for his family practice, walked in for his early morning rounds. He stopped when he saw me standing beside an empty examination table, my hands positioned as if I was caring for someone who wasn't there. "Maria, what are you doing?" I tried to explain about the patient, about how she'd been sick all week but was finally improving. I pointed to the IV pole and the monitors that were clearly visible to me, beeping steadily as they tracked her recovery. Dr. Peterson couldn't see any of it. To him, I was talking to empty air, pantomiming medical procedures with imaginary equipment. He called building management immediately. Within an hour, I was sitting in the security office being questioned by my supervisor, a building manager, and someone from human resources. They asked about my mental health, my home life, whether I'd been taking any medications or drinking alcohol. I tried to explain about the hospital, about the patients who needed care, about how the building had been teaching me to help them, but every word made them more concerned about my psychological state. They placed me on immediate suspension pending a psychiatric evaluation. Security escorted me out of the building while the morning shift employees watched from the lobby. After 5 years of dedicated service, I was treated like a dangerous person who couldn't be trusted. The psychiatric evaluation lasted 3 days. I told the truth about everything I'd experienced, which the doctor interpreted as evidence of a severe mental breakdown. The isolation of night shift work, combined with the stress of working alone in such a large building, had apparently caused me to develop elaborate delusions. I was fired for erratic behavior and inability to perform my duties safely. The building hired a replacement janitor, but he quit after 1 night. The second replacement lasted 3 nights before she refused to return. The third janitor made it through a week, but filed a report claiming the building was haunted and demanding hazard pay. Management decided to suspend night janitorial services temporarily while they figured out what was causing their staffing problems. But the patients couldn't wait for bureaucratic solutions. I started returning to the building after midnight, using service entrances and emergency codes that somehow still worked with my old keycards. The building welcomed me back like I'd never left. The heating followed me through the hallways. The elevators responded perfectly, and my cleaning cart appeared fully stocked with both janitorial and medical supplies. The patients had been suffering without proper care. Several who'd been recovering had gotten worse. Others had given up hope entirely. But when I resumed my duties, they began healing again. I've been living in the building for 10 months now. During the day, I sleep in unused offices or conference rooms. The building provides everything I need: food from the restaurant kitchens, hot water in the employee break rooms, and electricity that never gets shut off. The office workers don't know I'm here. They assume the building is maintained by some invisible janitorial service. They see their trash emptied, their floors cleaned, and their restrooms stocked, but they never question how it happens. What they don't know is that their modern office building is also a fully functioning hospital from 1924, with dozens of patients receiving round-the-clock care from a custodian who's learned to see beyond the surface of things. Sometimes other spirits find their way here. People who died in accidents or from sudden illnesses, confused and needing medical attention they never received in life. The building accepts them all, and I do my best to help them heal. I know this sounds crazy. I know what people would think if I told them the truth. But every night, when I make my rounds through floors that exist in 2 different times, caring for patients who've been waiting a century for proper treatment, I know I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. The building and I have found our purpose together. And sometimes, when a patient finally recovers enough to move on to whatever comes next, the gratitude in their eyes makes everything worth it. My name is Maria Gonzalez. I'm still a custodian, but now I'm also the head nurse of a hospital that officially closed 40 years ago. And I've never been better at my job. My name is Jake Morrison, and I've been working overnight shifts at gas stations for 8 years now. Started when I was 18, fresh out of high school, just looking for any job that would pay the bills. Most people see it as dead-end work, but I actually like the quiet. No bosses breathing down my neck, no office politics, just me and the occasional customer rolling through. I've worked stations in Anchorage, Fairbanks, even down in the lower 48 for a couple years. But nothing prepared me for what happened during the 3 months I worked at the Tesoro station on Richardson Highway. What I experienced there made me question everything I thought I knew about reality itself. The Richardson Highway Tesoro sits about 200 miles north of Fairbanks, right before you hit the really dangerous mountain passes heading toward the Canadian border. It's the last fuel stop for truckers and tourists before they tackle some of the most isolated road in North America. During winter, that stretch becomes downright deadly. People depend on our station, not just for gas, but for food, emergency supplies, and sometimes shelter when the weather turns bad. I took the job in March 2024. The pay was decent, better than most stations because of the remote location. The owner, Mr. Kowalski, explained that I'd be completely alone from 11 at night until 7 in the morning. No backup within 100 miles. The nearest town was just a cluster of houses with maybe 50 people total. He showed me the security system, cameras covering every angle, a panic button that connected to state police, and a safe room behind the office in case of emergencies. The station itself was pretty standard. 2 gas pumps out front, a small convenience store with the usual snacks and drinks, a coffee machine that I had to keep running all night, and a CB radio for truckers. We also had a satellite phone for emergencies when cell service went down, which happened a lot during storms. My job was simple: sell gas, keep the coffee fresh, stock the shelves, and help stranded travelers with directions or weather updates. The first month went fine. I got to know the regular customers, long-haul truckers who made the run to Canada twice a week, local folks from the nearby villages, and the occasional tourist brave enough to drive the highway in March. Most truckers were friendly, happy to chat during those long, cold nights. They'd warn me about bad weather coming, or tell me which roads were getting icy. It felt like being part of a community, even out in the middle of nowhere. But around the end of April, things started getting weird. It began with small stuff that I barely noticed at first. A trucker would come in, buy coffee and a sandwich, chat for a few minutes, then leave. 20 minutes later, the same guy would walk back in, looking exactly the same, wearing the same clothes, and order the exact same items. When I'd mention that he'd just been in, he'd look confused and say it was his first stop all day. At first, I figured I was just tired. Working nights messes with your head sometimes. But it kept happening. Different customers, same pattern. They'd come in, make a purchase, leave, then return later with no memory of the first visit. Even stranger, they'd have completely different vehicles each time. The trucker who came in driving a Peterbilt would come back an hour later in a Kenworth, but swear he'd been driving the Kenworth all week. I started paying closer attention to the credit cards they used. That's when things got really strange. The same customer would use different cards with completely different names, but I could swear they had the same fingerprints on the card readers. Same voice, same mannerisms, same conversation topics, but different identities. One night in early May, a middle-aged woman came in around 2 a.m. She bought a bag of chips, a Coke, and asked for directions to Chicken, Alaska. Normal enough request. Chicken's a tiny town about 60 miles east. I gave her the directions, she thanked me, and drove off in a blue Honda Civic. 45 minutes later, the exact same woman walked back in. Same clothes, same hair, same everything. But now she was driving a red pickup truck. She bought the exact same items, chips and Coke, and asked for the exact same directions to Chicken. When I told her she'd just been in, she looked at me like I was crazy. "I've never been here before in my life," she said. "This is my first time on Richardson Highway." I checked the security cameras later that night. Here's the thing that really messed with me. The footage showed me serving customers and taking money, but the cameras didn't show any customers. On the recordings, I was just talking to empty air, taking money from invisible hands, and bagging items for no one. The cash register told a different story too. According to the system, I hadn't made any sales during the times I clearly remembered serving those duplicate customers. The money was there in the drawer, but the computer had no record of the transactions. I called Mr. Kowalski the next morning, tried to explain what was happening. He said security cameras malfunction all the time in cold weather, and maybe I was working too many consecutive nights. Suggested I take a day off, get some sleep. I didn't want to sound crazy, so I didn't push it. But the pattern kept getting worse. By mid-May, I was seeing the same customers 3, 4, sometimes 5 times per night. They'd drive different vehicles, use different names, but carry on identical conversations, word for word, the same stories about their families, the same complaints about gas prices, the same questions about road conditions. That's when I started noticing something even stranger. The customers weren't just repeating themselves, they were studying me. I'd catch them watching my movements when they thought I wasn't looking. They'd ask questions about my schedule, my background, how long I'd worked at the station. At first, it seemed like normal small talk. But every duplicate customer asked the exact same personal questions. One trucker asked me, "How long you been working here?" "Son?" I told him about 3 months. "You like it?" "The isolation, I mean, must get lonely." 20 minutes later, a completely different customer, an older woman, asked me the exact same question using the exact same words. Then a third customer did it, then a fourth. All of them tilted their heads the same way when they asked, used the same hand gestures, even paused at the same moments. It was like they were practicing being me. The really terrifying realization came in early June. I was working my usual shift when a trucker pulled up around midnight. Big guy, maybe 50 years old, wearing a Denver Broncos cap. He came in, bought his usual coffee and jerky, and we talked about the weather. Nothing unusual. But when he walked back to his truck, I saw his face clearly in the security monitor. It was my face. Not similar, identical. Same eyes, same nose, same facial hair. He was wearing my face like a mask, but doing a perfect imitation of the trucker's voice and mannerisms. I ran outside, but his truck was already pulling away. I could see him through the driver's side window, and he turned to look at me. When our eyes met, he smiled and gave a little wave. It was my smile, my hand, but someone else behind my face. That's when the real horror started. Over the next few weeks, I began encountering multiple versions of myself. They'd come in as customers, sometimes 2 or 3 different versions during a single shift. One would be wearing my face, but acting like an elderly tourist. Another would have my exact appearance, but speak with a trucker's accent and mannerisms. A third might look exactly like me, but behave like a local resident. The worst part was that they all had my memories. They knew details about my life that I'd never shared with anyone. Stories from my childhood, my mother's maiden name, the scar on my knee from a bike accident when I was 7. When I tried to prove I was the real Jake by asking questions only I would know, they answered everything perfectly. I couldn't tell which one was really me anymore. During one particularly bad night, I had 4 different versions of myself in the store at the same time. We all looked identical, but each one insisted he was the real Jake Morrison. One claimed to have worked at the station for 8 years. Another said he'd started just last week. A third had memories of working there since he was a teenager. They started arguing with each other about who was authentic. Their voices were all exactly the same. My voice, but their personalities were completely different. It was like listening to multiple radio stations, broadcasting on the same frequency. That's when I realized what was happening. Something was living in the area around the gas station, something that could copy people perfectly. It had been studying the customers who stopped for gas, learning their appearances and behaviors, then creating perfect duplicates. And now it was learning to be me. I found evidence the next morning. About a quarter-mile behind the station, hidden in a grove of pine trees, I discovered several abandoned vehicles, cars and trucks that belonged to customers I remembered serving weeks earlier. The vehicles were covered in snow and ice. They'd been there for months. Inside the tree line, I found the bodies, frozen corpses of all the customers I'd seen duplicated. The original people were dead, and something had been wearing their faces, practicing their personalities, studying me through their eyes. I understood then why the owner had trouble keeping attendance. The job listing had mentioned high turnover, and I'd assumed it was because of the isolation. But the truth was worse. Previous attendants hadn't quit. They'd been replaced. I was next. That final night, I prepared for what I knew was coming. I armed myself with everything I could find: a baseball bat from the back office, a can of bear spray we kept for emergencies, and the satellite phone in case I somehow survived to call for help. Around 3 a.m., I heard the door chime. I looked up from the register to see myself walking in. Not a customer wearing my face. This was me, exactly as I appeared, wearing the same uniform, even the same coffee stain on my shirt from earlier that evening. "Hey there," the other me said with my voice. "Rough night, huh?" I gripped the baseball bat tighter. "You're not me." The duplicate smiled. My smile, but wrong somehow. "Sure I am. I'm Jake Morrison. Been working here for 8 years. Started when I was 18, fresh out of high school. It had my memories, my mannerisms, even my tendency to adjust my collar when nervous. But there was something missing, something that made me realize what the creature couldn't copy. "What's your biggest regret?" I asked. The duplicate paused, tilted its head. "I don't understand. Everyone has regrets, things they wish they'd done differently. What's yours?" It stared at me blankly. It had access to all my factual memories, my experiences, my knowledge. But it couldn't replicate the emotions attached to those memories. It didn't understand regret, guilt, or the complex feelings that make someone human. That was its weakness. I grabbed the bear spray and emptied the entire canister into its face. The duplicate screamed, not with my voice, but with something else, something that sounded like wind through dead trees. Its features began to shift and blur, my face melting like wax. The creature's true form was something I still can't fully describe. It wasn't entirely physical, more like a shadow with substance, something that existed in the spaces between real and unreal. It fled through the wall of the station, passing through solid matter like smoke. I called the state police on the satellite phone and waited until dawn for them to arrive. I showed them the abandoned vehicles, the bodies in the woods, and gave them a statement that was probably the strangest report they'd ever taken. The investigation lasted 3 months. They found evidence of at least 12 missing persons over the past 5 years, all customers who'd stopped at the station and never reached their destinations. The official reports listed them as victims of exposure and wildlife attacks. But I know the truth. I don't work at gas stations anymore. I've got a day shift job at a hardware store in Fairbanks now, surrounded by people and normal problems like inventory and customer complaints. But sometimes, late at night, I'll see someone who looks a little too familiar. Someone whose smile doesn't quite reach their eyes, or who asks questions just to study how I respond. I've learned to trust my instincts about what's real and what's not. And I always remember, the thing that makes us human isn't what we remember or how we look. It's what we feel about those memories, especially the painful ones. If you ever find yourself on a lonely stretch of highway in the middle of the night and something doesn't feel quite right about the person serving you gas, trust that feeling. And whatever you do, don't let them study you too closely. They might be practicing. My name is Kevin Torres, and for the last 8 years, I've been hauling packages through the most godforsaken wilderness on Earth. Alaska doesn't just test you, it strips away everything you think you know about survival, about reality, about what's possible in this world. I've delivered to mining camps where men go missing every winter, to research stations where the scientists won't make eye contact, to places that don't appear on any map but somehow have postal codes. But during the polar night of December 2024, I discovered something that made me understand why the old Inupiat elders warn their children never to go outside during the darkest weeks. Some things only move when the sun abandons Alaska completely. Some things have been waiting in that darkness for a very, very long time. And some things wear human faces until they don't need to anymore. The polar night in Fairbanks isn't just darkness, it's the complete absence of hope. From November through January, the sun barely crawls above the horizon before disappearing again, leaving you in a twilight world where your headlights and the aurora borealis are the only proof that light still exists somewhere in the universe. Temperatures drop to 60 below. Your breath freezes and falls like glass. Metal becomes so brittle it snaps like chalk. I've been running delivery routes through this hell since 2016. My truck is a heavily modified Ford Transit, double-walled cargo area, diesel heating system, emergency beacon, satellite phone, and enough survival gear to last a week if I get stranded. My route covers 300 square miles of wilderness, military installations, research facilities, and settlements so remote they might as well be on another planet. The money is good because most drivers quit after their first polar night. You have to be crazy or desperate to keep hauling packages when the world looks like the surface of a dead moon. I'm probably both. December 18th, 2024. Temperature, -57. Visibility, quarter mile in blowing snow. I had 89 packages loaded, including several deliveries to places I'd never heard of despite 8 years on this route. The first package was addressed to Dr. E. Thorne, Permafrost Research Station, Mile 127, Steese Highway. No problem, I knew the station. Small outfit studying climate change effects on permanently frozen ground. I'd delivered there dozens of times. Except when I arrived, the research station was gone. Not destroyed, gone. Empty foundation, some scattered equipment covered in snow, but no buildings. The GPS insisted I was in the right place. The package label matched the coordinates exactly, but I was staring at empty tundra that looked like it had been vacant for decades. I called the delivery dispatcher. Static. Tried my satellite phone. No signal, which was impossible. The military-grade system had never failed before. The package in my hands felt wrong. It was the size of a small book, but it kept shifting weight, sometimes heavy as a brick, sometimes light as air. The return address read, Thorne Institute for Circumpolar Biology, Anchorage. But when I looked again a moment later, it said, Thorne Memorial Archive, Barrow. The address kept changing. I drove back to town and researched the Thorne Institute. No results. Searched for Dr. E. Thorne. Nothing. Checked the Permafrost Research Station in municipal records. According to every database I could access, it had never existed. But I had the package. I had GPS logs of dozens of previous deliveries to that exact location. I had signed receipts from Dr. Thorne himself, a tall, thin man with pale eyes who always wore the same brown wool coat and never spoke above a whisper. The next morning brought 3 more packages to the same address. By the end of the week, I was getting dozens, all different sizes, all addressed to research stations, mining operations, and settlements that didn't exist. Places I remembered visiting, people I remembered meeting, but which had apparently never been real. The packages themselves became increasingly disturbing. Some felt warm, like they contained living things. Others made soft scratching sounds. A few leaked a dark fluid that stained my cargo floor and never dried, no matter how much I cleaned it. The fluid had a smell like copper pennies, mixed with something sweet and rotten. I started keeping a logbook of every strange delivery, photographing addresses and package labels before they could change. The photos came out distorted, faces blurred, text scrambled, GPS coordinates that pointed to locations in the Arctic Ocean. On December 23rd, I received a package addressed to myself. Kevin Torres, Mile 67 Richardson Highway, my own address. The return label read, K. Torres, Collection Specialist, Polar Night Division. Inside was a leather-bound journal written in my own handwriting. Pages and pages of delivery logs for places that couldn't exist, signed receipts from people with names like Abigail Frost and Wilhelm Nacht, detailed descriptions of cargo that made my skin crawl just reading about it. According to my own journal, I had been making these deliveries for 15 years. Not 8, 15. The first entries were dated 2009, describing packages delivered to the settlement at the world's end and the laboratory beneath the ice. I had no memory of writing any of it. The journal's final entry, dated yesterday in my own hand, read, "The collection is almost complete. Kevin is beginning to remember. Soon he will understand his true purpose. The polar night reveals what daylight hides. The packages must reach their destinations. The residents are waiting. They have always been waiting." That night, I started remembering things that hadn't happened. I remembered Dr. Thorne taking delivery of packages filled with soil samples that moved like living things. I remembered the permafrost research station's basement laboratory, where they kept specimens preserved in ice that shouldn't have been able to preserve anything. I remembered conversations with Thorne about the old settlements and the first inhabitants and what sleeps beneath the permafrost. I remembered delivering packages to places that existed only during the polar night. On Christmas Eve, my GPS routed me to a location 200 miles north of Fairbanks, deep in the Brooks Range where no roads should exist. But there was a road, smooth black asphalt, that appeared in my headlights and disappeared behind me as I drove. The road led to a town called Nix. Nix had streetlights and shops and houses, all perfectly preserved but covered in a thin layer of ice that never melted. The residents came out to collect their packages. Pale, quiet people who moved like sleepwalkers and spoke in voices like wind through empty buildings. Their breath didn't freeze. Their eyes reflected light like mirrors. Mrs. Evangeline Ash signed for a package the size of a coffin. "Thank you, Kevin. Same time next year?" "Next year? Oh yes, you've been coming here every December for many years. You just forget when the sun returns. We all do. The daylight makes us forget what's real." I delivered 17 packages in Nix that night. The residents were friendly, normal people who happened to live in a town that existed only in absolute darkness. They had children who played in the frozen streets and dogs that wagged their tails silently in the perpetual twilight. Everything was perfectly ordinary, except for the wrongness that hung in the air like the smell of deep ice. When I tried to leave, my truck wouldn't start. The engine turned over, but something was wrong with the electrical system. All my gauges showed impossible readings. The fuel gauge indicated I had -5 gallons. The speedometer was spinning backward. The temperature gauge showed 451 degrees below zero. Mr. Harold Winter knocked on my window. He was a maintenance worker who had signed for a package containing what felt like human bones. "Engine troubles, Kevin? Happens every year. You'll remember how to fix it." I popped the hood. The engine block was covered in a thin layer of that same ice that coated everything in town. But when I touched it, the ice felt warm. More than warm, it felt alive, pulsing with its own rhythm like a slow heartbeat. The ice spoke to me, not in words, but in understanding that flooded my mind all at once. I was Kevin Torres, and I was also something else. Something that wore Kevin Torres like a winter coat during the months when the sun shined. Something that emerged during the polar night to make deliveries to places that existed in the spaces between reality and dream. I remembered my real job now. Not delivering packages, collecting them. Every package I had ever delivered to the impossible places came back to me filled with specimens, with samples, with pieces of the world that daylight couldn't touch. I was harvesting the polar night itself, gathering evidence of what lived in Alaska's deepest darkness. The truck started immediately. I drove back toward Fairbanks as more memories surfaced. 15 years of polar night deliveries to places that vanished with the sunrise. Conversations with Dr. Thorne about the collection and maintaining the boundaries and keeping the daylight world safe from what belongs to darkness. I remembered the real contents of those packages now. Soil samples from graveyards that had never been mapped. Ice cores from lakes that existed only at certain times of year. Biological specimens from creatures that lived in the Aurora Borealis itself. Audio recordings of voices speaking languages that predated human settlement in Alaska by thousands of years. All of it cataloged, preserved, and studied by people who existed only during the polar night. When I reached Fairbanks, the sun was rising for the first time in weeks. The polar night was ending, and with it, my memories began to fade like dreams. By noon, I could barely remember driving anywhere unusual. The packages in my truck were normal deliveries, Christmas gifts, replacement parts, medical supplies, but I kept the journal. Every year when the polar night returns, I remember what I really am. For 2 months, I make deliveries to places that don't exist, collecting specimens from Alaska's hidden residents, maintaining the careful boundary between the world of daylight and the world of endless winter. The rest of the year, I'm just Kevin Torres, delivery driver. I live in a small apartment, watch Netflix, complain about the weather like everyone else. I have no memory of the places I visit or the people I meet during those dark months. The daylight world keeps me human, keeps me normal, keeps me sane. But every November, when the sun starts its retreat and the darkness begins to gather, I feel something stirring in the back of my mind. Something that remembers the real roads through Alaska's wilderness. Something that knows where to find the settlements that exist only in perpetual twilight. Something that has work to do. The Inupiat elders are right to warn their children about the polar night. Some things do move only in absolute darkness. Some things have been waiting in Alaska's deepest winter for longer than humans have existed. And some things need people like me to keep them fed. If you ever get a package delivered during Alaska's polar night, and the driver looks familiar, but you can't remember where you've seen him before, don't sign for it. Don't take the package inside. And whatever you do, don't look too closely at the return address. Because once you see where those packages really come from, the daylight world starts feeling like the dream, and the polar night starts feeling like home. And that's when they know you're ready to join the collection. My name is Lisa Chen, and I've been delivering food through DoorDash for 3 years now. I started doing deliveries when I was a junior at the University of Alaska, just trying to pay for my biology degree without drowning in student loans. The gig economy wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and gave me flexible hours around my lab work and classes. I thought I knew every corner of our campus, every research building, every late-night lab where hungry grad students needed their caffeine fix. But what happened in March 2024 changed everything I thought I knew about the work being done in those sterile white buildings. Some experiments should never see the light of day. The University of Alaska campus sprawls across nearly 2,000 acres, and I'd made deliveries to just about every building on it. The research facilities were my bread and butter. Those places never slept. PhD students pulling all-nighters, professors working on grant deadlines, lab techs running experiments that couldn't be paused. They ordered constantly: energy drinks, coffee, late-night Chinese food, pizza that would keep them going until dawn. I knew the campus like my own backyard. Building access codes, security guard schedules, which elevators went to which floors. My student ID got me into most places after hours. And the few restrictions I encountered were usually just a matter of calling the right number or waiting for someone to buzz me in. The money was decent, especially during finals week when desperation drove tip amounts through the roof. March in Alaska is brutal. We're talking -20 temperatures, 18 hours of darkness, and wind that cuts right through your heaviest parka. But that's also when research activity peaks. Something about the extreme conditions brings out the workaholics in academia. I'd gotten used to delivering to sub-basement labs I'd never seen on any campus map. Places that required special elevators and security clearances I didn't know existed. That's when I started noticing the changes. It began with the orders themselves. The researchers I'd been delivering to for years suddenly started ordering massive quantities of food. Not just for themselves, but cases of energy drinks, dozens of sandwiches, enough caffeine to keep a small army awake for weeks. When I asked Dr. Martinez in the molecular biology building about it, he just said they had a big project running and looked like he hadn't slept in days. Then came the security upgrades. Buildings that used to have one sleepy guard suddenly had 3, all of them wearing tactical gear I'd never seen on campus before. New keycards were required for areas that used to be open access. Elevators needed special authorization to reach certain floors. When I asked about it, the guards just said there were new safety protocols and wouldn't elaborate. The really weird part was the equipment. I'd been studying biology for 3 years. I knew what normal lab equipment looked like. But walking past open doorways, I started seeing things that didn't belong in any textbook. Containment units, the size of small rooms, airlocks, hazmat suits hanging by doors like everyday lab coats, and the sounds, animals, but not like any animals I'd heard before. howling that didn't sound quite like wolves, chittering that was too intelligent for insects. Dr. Patel from the genetics lab used to chat with me during deliveries. She was friendly, always asked about my classes, gave me advice about graduate programs. But by the middle of March, she barely made eye contact. Her hands shook when she signed for deliveries, and she kept glancing over her shoulder like something was following her. When I asked if she was okay, she just said the work was more stressful than usual and practically slammed the door in my face. The breaking point came on March 23rd. I had a delivery to the Advanced Research Complex, a building I'd been to dozens of times, but never to subbasement level 3. The order was huge: 20 energy drinks, 15 sandwiches, enough food for a small research team working around the clock. The delivery instructions were specific. Use service elevator C, proceed to SB3, room 3047, do not deviate from marked path. The service elevator required a special keycard, but they'd buzzed me in and told me someone would meet me. As the elevator descended past floors I didn't know existed, I felt my ears pop from the pressure change. We were going deep underground, deeper than any basement I knew about on campus. The doors opened to a hallway that looked more like a military bunker than a university research facility. Concrete walls, industrial lighting, and that antiseptic smell that meant serious decontamination was happening somewhere nearby. The marked path was literally marked, yellow tape on the floor leading down a corridor lined with doors that had warning labels I couldn't quite read from a distance. That's when the alarm started. Red lights began flashing, and a computerized voice echoed through the hallway. Containment breach. All personnel evacuate immediately. This is not a drill. The sound was deafening, echoing off the concrete walls until I could barely think straight. I should have run. Any normal person would have dropped the food and headed straight for that elevator. But I'd never abandoned a delivery, and frankly, I needed the money from this order. Plus, my biology background kicked in. I was curious about what kind of research required this level of security. That curiosity almost got me killed. I was halfway down the yellow-taped path when I heard it. Footsteps that didn't sound human. The rhythm was wrong, like something with too many legs trying to walk upright. Then I saw it turn the corner ahead of me. It was about the size of a large dog, but that's where any resemblance to normal animals ended. Its body was covered in what looked like scales that shifted color as it moved, and it had too many eyes, 6 that I could count, arranged around its head in a pattern that made my stomach turn. But the worst part was its intelligence. Those eyes focused on me with unmistakable recognition, like it was deciding whether I was food or threat. I dropped the delivery bags and backed toward the elevator, but the creature moved to block my path. That's when I realized it wasn't alone. 2 more appeared from side corridors, and these were different. Larger, with limbs that bent in ways that violated basic anatomy, and a sound like chittering mixed with something almost like human speech. My biology training kicked in, and I recognized what I was looking at. These weren't natural animals. They were chimeras, genetic combinations of multiple species, created in a lab and designed for purposes I didn't want to think about. The cold adaptation features were obvious. Thick fur mixed with those color-changing scales, oversized paws that looked designed for ice, and that intelligence that suggested cognitive enhancement. They were beautiful and horrible at the same time, like someone had taken the most successful survival traits from a dozen different Arctic animals and combined them into something that should never have existed. The creature started moving in coordination, trying to surround me. I remembered my animal behavior classes, pack hunters, but with enhanced intelligence. They weren't just acting on instinct, they were strategizing. I grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall and aimed it at the closest creature. The blast of chemical foam made it retreat, but not in fear, more like annoyance, like I was a minor obstacle to be dealt with. That's when I knew I was in serious trouble. The elevator doors were still open behind me, but 2 of the creatures had positioned themselves to cut off that escape route. The third was moving along the wall, using the ceiling-mounted pipes for leverage in a way that no normal animal could manage. That's when the real horror hit me. These things weren't just escaped lab animals. They'd been designed as weapons. The intelligence, the coordination, the way they moved through an environment they'd clearly studied. This was military bioengineering, not academic research. I heard human voices echoing from somewhere in the facility, researchers screaming, doors slamming, the sound of equipment being smashed. Whatever had contained these things was failing catastrophically. One of the creatures made a sound that was almost like speech, and the others responded. They were communicating in some hybrid of human language and animal calls, planning their next move. I realized they'd been watching me, learning my behavior during my regular deliveries. I wasn't a random victim. I was a target they'd selected. The ceiling crawler dropped down behind me, cutting off the last escape route. I was surrounded by 3 genetically modified predators in an underground bunker with no way out and no help coming. I did the only thing I could think of. I started talking to them. "Hey there," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm just the delivery person. I bring food. You understand food, right?" The closest creature tilted its head, and for a moment I saw something almost human in its multiple eyes. These things had been given enhanced intelligence, which meant they might be capable of reasoning. I slowly reached into the dropped delivery bag and pulled out one of the sandwiches. The creatures immediately focused on it with laser intensity. They were hungry. Probably hadn't been fed properly since whatever experiment had gone wrong. I unwrapped the sandwich and tossed it to the side. All 3 creatures moved toward it, their attention momentarily diverted. That gave me just enough time to dive for the elevator and slam the emergency close button. The last thing I saw before the doors shut was 6 intelligent eyes watching me escape, and I knew they were memorizing my face for next time. I got out of that building and drove straight to the campus police. But when I tried to report what had happened, they told me there had been a minor gas leak in the research complex and that all personnel had been safely evacuated. No animals, no genetic experiments, just a standard building maintenance issue. The official story never changed. The university blamed equipment malfunction for the evacuation. The local news reported a gas leak. Students were told to avoid the research complex for routine maintenance, and life went on as normal. But I knew better. I started digging into university research grants, looking for funding that might support bioweapons research. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. Millions in military contracts, partnerships with defense contractors, and research proposals that read like science fiction nightmares. When I tried to take my evidence to the media, I was told my academic career would be over before it started. When I persisted, I was expelled from the university for academic misconduct that I'd never committed. When I tried to publish my story online, my accounts were suspended and my internet access was restricted. I left Alaska and finished my degree at a state school in the lower 48. I work as a freelance science writer now, documenting cases of illegal genetic research and military bioweapons development. The work doesn't pay much, but at least I can sleep at night knowing I'm trying to warn people about what's really happening in those underground labs. I still drive for delivery apps sometimes when money gets tight, but I've never taken another order to a university research facility, and I never will. Because some experiments should stay buried, and some deliveries should never be made.